In this video, we're going to talk about lights in 3D Studio, and we're going to see the different type of lights. We're going to see that we have Arnold Lights. Arnold is the current render at the moment. So we will start also to talk about rendering, because lighting, materials, and rendering, they go all together. So you can see there we can switch in the viewport, and we can use active shade and rendering using Arnold directly. No, it's giving me some issues here. So this is gonna be like a message that is gonna appear whenever there are some issues with materials. Now again, we are using at the moment like default settings. So we're going to address all the different important settings that we need to do when we want to use Arnold. If you want to use Arnold as a render, of course it's better to use Arnold materials and Arnold lights. But some of these standard materials and standard lights can also be used with Arnold. So we're gonna experiment and show all the differences. So I'm gonna go in the render setup here, and you can see that now we have set up the Arnold render. And if you don't see that, you can set up the Arnold render yourself. And in the right side, that's the creation tab. You can see the third button there. These are the lights, and there are different type of lights. So if you want to work with Corona render, for example, which is another render engine, you need to use Corona lights and Corona materials. But also you can try with standard lights, standard materials. So whenever you assign a render, essentially you need to change everything to be synchronize more to match everything. So if you use V-Ray, also another really popular render engine out there, you can again do the same thing. So try to use the standard material, standard lights, or if they don't work, you change to the specific, like every render engine has its own. You can see Corona, you can see Octane, you can see V-Ray. Now these are all pretty similar. So Arnold, it's pretty similar to what you saw here. Another one which I really like is Fluid Ray, because it's really easy to use, really simple, and you can check Fluid Ray video course in the channel. And again, this is like a real-time interactive rendering. So another one is Lumion, which is gonna create interactive real-time renderings, or Enscape, and you have Twin Motion. Now they all do renderings basically, but and Enscape, they all do renderings. And if you're interested, check the courses in the channel, and you can also write for your questions, ask for assistance. But they do this in very different ways. Now another one also is Unreal Engine. This is a really popular one to create renderings. You can use Unity, and they're gonna produce real-time rendering again. Now they base the lighting system on the global illumination. They all work more or less the same. They all use global illumination. They use the light to create realistic renderings, and the light behaves with photons and with rays that are projected into the scene to like scan your scene to find objects in your scene, and then they come back with the image of your interior or exterior of your scene. So the global illumination is based on direct and indirect lighting. Direct lighting is from the source, which could be natural source like the sun, or artificial source like a lamp, and then it hits the surface of your scene and it's going to reveal your scene, just like in reality. And then it's going to start to bounce around with indirect illumination. So you can illuminate objects directly or indirectly, depending on the scene. But all these render engine that can be used today, they all use global illumination. That's like the standard. And it wasn't like this a few years ago. So I'm gonna do the first experiments here to show you how the global illumination works and also how the lights work in Arnold. So I place here an object inside my scene, a really simple object with just a plane. So we're going to start simple as usual. And this object here can be downloaded from Sketchfab. This is the page here. The author, you can just click you can see it's public domain, so you can use it for any purposes. And you can see that you need to import it here and import also the textures. So again, we're gonna click and drag the texture onto the object to create a really simple material, which is not probably an Arnold material. It's gonna be like a standard material. And we always need to make sure that everything works. So if it doesn't, you need to create Arnold material or Corona material or VDA material, whatever. So you need to always run the first rendering. So this is why material, light, and rendering process, they go simultaneously. You cannot do one thing without the other. So these are like three things that go together. So we're gonna render, and first of all we're gonna see if everything looks fine or if some message is gonna pop up, and if there is some issue, we need to address it, we need to solve it. But in this case, you can see I didn't receive any message, so everything is fine. And this is not even a material on the plane, it's just a standard color which you can use. You can definitely use standard colors, they will be rendered, but of course it's better to create materials rather than simple colors. Now we can also go in the view settings here and make sure that we are lining up our scene with the scene lights instead of the default lights. Otherwise it's not gonna react to what we're gonna do. Instead we want to illuminate with the lights that we're gonna use in the scene. And let's start to place also the first light. So you can see here again you have a selection of lights: photometric, standard, and then you have Arnold. Now let's start with the standard. I'm gonna place the standard light. This is a spherical light, also called Omni Light, and it's a light that shoots photons. So in every direction, it's gonna illuminate in every direction. This is why it's called Omni. Stands for omnidirectional, so all the directions. And let's run again a first render. There you go. And let's see what's gonna happen here now. Now I'm not seeing anything yet, so it's probably not supported by Arnold. So it's either not supported or it's too low, but I think everything is near. So I'm gonna try with another one, try with the photometric, and it's asking me if I wanna switch here the exposure, but at the moment I don't wanna switch anything, just to show you the basics. Then we're gonna talk about the environment, the exposure, and all those settings later on. Just gonna add a photometric light, place it into the scene again. Now photometric behaves more realistic and more natural than the standard light. And there you go, now we can see it. So we cannot use standard 3ds Max lights using Arnold, but we can use photometric, and that's a good news. But again, you always need to run some tests and see if they work and if the render looks nice. Now I changed the view here, I rendered the view from the front view, and right now I'm running here the interactive rendering window. So you can see that if I move the light inside the scene, it's gonna be interactively shown inside the viewport. Now interactive rendering is an extremely powerful and useful tool that you can use, and you can do it also there in the viewport if you activate the active shade plus high quality and Arnold render. You can also change the resolution, so if it gets too heavy to render, in real time and interactively, you can always drop down the quality so that you can work faster and well, less heavier than usual. So you can see that if you move the light around, that's not like a preview, that's the actual render. It's just a draft version of the render. Now let's move on. Let's create another one. So this is a free light. So it means that you can place it anywhere you want. And then you have a target light. And again, it's showing up this panel here, which is asking me if I want to switch to the physical camera or not. Well, let's say yes now, so that we can see that there is not much difference in terms of the results in the rendering. Now I'm going to click, and also I have the target, so I need to position both the source of lighting and the target. This is when you use lights with target. Now lights with target are really useful, especially when you have directional light, so not lights that shoot in every direction, but they are concentrated in one direction. It's useful to have a target because you can direct the source of lighting and also your objective, your target of the light. So this is again an Omni Light. So it doesn't make really difference if you have a target or not, but you can change later the type of light and make it like a spotlight or something different, but we're gonna get to that later on. I'm just creating now a sun positioner. This is again a photometric light inside 3ds Max, and you can see now it's too bright. So another really important thing to address when you work with lighting is exposure, is how much light you are letting in your camera basically. So if you go into rendering, and we will find this environment and effects panel. This is where we can work with the environment and additional effects, but more important is to work with the environment. And you can see it added also here a map for us, which is going to be a physical sun and sky map. So this is another thing it does if you say yes when you place the sun positioner. And you can see that we can change the tint of the background, but let's talk about the exposure right now. So you can see right now we are using the physical camera exposure control, and you can see down there we have EV, which is exposure. So I can change also the type of exposure again. I can bring it back to the original one. Now let's drop down the resolution here, and let's work a little bit with the exposure so that we can see some changes. Then you have automatic exposure control, which is having these values down there. So if I turn down the brightness, we can start to see something there. Then we have linear exposure control. Again, we have the brightness. We can turn all the way down. And then we have the one that, well, this is another one actually, logarithmic. So these are all different types of exposure. You can see this one here works better. I can actually see my statue there, my pavement, my floor. So now it's working. So you can try with different types of exposure, but logarithmic is going to be the one you're going to probably use, and also photographic, but we're going to see that also later on, how to work with cameras and real parameters, real world parameters, like the f-stops or the shutter speed and so on. So this is a more natural lighting if we use sun and sky. Otherwise, this is going to be like default light. Well, actually, this is the skylight illuminating the scene. This is now the standard light, the default light. So the skylight is going to be like a bluish light that is going to be really diffuse, not directional in any way. It doesn't matter where you position the skylight, it's always going to look the same. Now let's go here, and again we use the standard light, but it didn't work. Now sometimes, for example, with Corona or V-Ray, we can just switch the type of shadows and those are gonna work. So sometimes you can also try to use different shadows and they're gonna work with the render engine that you're using. But in the case of Arnold, we just can use the Photometric and the Arnold Lights. So again, I'm creating another standard free light, and if I want to change it, you can see then if I go in the modify, I can change different parameters. I can change the type of bulb, the type of light. So this is going to affect the color, which in talking about lights, color is about temperature. And if we scroll down there, we can see that Kelvin degrees are the temperature value. So the more you increase it, the more it's going to be a bluish light. The more you decrease it, it's going to be warmer light, like yellowish or reddish light. So we have different setups that we can use if we want. You also have this web distribution, photometric web, which is going to be like a little bit more realistic. And I'm going to show you later how you can create more realistic lights using the IES effect. And it's going to create basically more realistic reflections. Now always make sure that shadows are turned on, otherwise your light will be really non-realistic. So that's another thing you want to check when you insert lights. And now let's go back to the exposure, and this is the opposite. Now this is a really dark situation. It's not like we are in an exterior with the sun and the sky. We just are in a pitch black situation, so I can increase the exposure again. So exposure always needs to be balanced, whether you are on an interior or a exterior. And now I'm just gonna copy by moving shift and click the spherical light. Now the Omni Light sometimes is called sphere light or spherical or omnidirectional, depending on the software that we're using, on the render engine that we're using. You can see here I'm increasing the Kelvin degrees and it's turning to a more bluish color. So now we can compare the two different type of lights. And also you can change the intensity. And again, this is going to behave just like in reality, that is going to fade out little by little, but you can also manage the fading, the dimming, the intensity, the near attenuation, the far attenuation. And so by changing the type of intensity, then you can change the way the light is going to look. Again, you can say, okay, I want this attenuation to start at some point and then to end to a precise area. So you're limiting the effect of the light this way. You are managing the intensity of the light and the decay of the light. Now you can see that you can change the light distribution, and if you change it to a spotlight, this is going to become a spotlight. So this is not an Omni Light anymore. It's a spot, so it's working with a more concentrated beam of light that can be directed. You can see there. Now the direction is really important. So we are switching from omnidirectional situation to a one direction situation. And you can see that also here we can use far and near attenuation. So many parameters would be found exactly the same way in all types of lights. But here also we have hotspot beam and fall off. So this is also working with the cone, not only with the source. Now let's use another one here. I'm gonna select the other light and we can see the line. So this is gonna be emitting from a line, or we can emit from a rectangle. So this is a rectangular light, or rectangle, or planar, or plane light. It has different names depending again on the software that you're using, on the render engine that you're using. And then we have sphere, cylinder. We can emit the light from all these different shapes, and this is going to affect, of course, the impact on the scene and on the object that we are rendering at the moment. And we are still in interactive rendering, and you can see why it's so powerful and so useful, because everything we do can be ready displayed on the render. Now you can run an interactive render also separately, so if you want to see it a little bit bigger and a little bit better instead of using the viewport, but that's your choice. I usually use the viewport, but we're gonna use later on also the frame, the rendered frame. Okay, other options here using the lights. Let's see what we can do here. Now I can go here and do editable poly with this plane. So I wanna, with this, create kind of a background. So I will select. This is one way to create like a photographic studio. So if I go there and shift and move, I'm gonna create a copy. So this is gonna be like an L shape, and it's kind of a photographic studio that you see usually really standard. Now I'm gonna select also those edges here and use the chamfer modifier in the polygonal editing tools, so that we can create a nice rounded connection between the vertical wall and the floor. So this is usually how a studio setup is prepared. So we can test better all our lights. To understand the lights better, you should always place them near a wall so that you can actually see the effect of the source. So you can see here that this is a directional light, and if I want to actually see the cone of the spotlight, I just need to rotate it and place it with it. We can switch the target option on anytime, so you can add a target anytime, and we can direct our light using the target. And again, when you use directional lights such as spotlights, I think the target is going to be really helpful. So I select both, and now I can move them up a little bit and back near the wall, so we can see the actual cone. And we can see then the hot spot beam and the fall off a little bit better. There you go. So we can manage that area that I am lighting up with that cone light or spotlight. And again, I can play around with the temperature or the color, intensity, and also the shape from which I will emit. And you can see it changes the aspect of the wall. So the wall is going to be illuminated differently according to the light shape that I will select. And we are still in the photometric lighting, but I'm going to show you all these options because you can use them. You can definitely use them with the Arnold renderer, and these are lights that are part of 3ds Max, just like the standard lights, which are pretty similar, by the way. You will find similar parameters. Well, not everyone, like this one here, it's for, again, giving like a shape to your various like caustic reflections and things. So it's not gonna be like a uniform light, but it's gonna have these different effects, and these are all IES effects, by the way, that we can add. We can also customize them, or download extra IES, and you can see they look more realistic than the average light. So you can use standard light, they are pretty much the same. You have the Omni, you have the other shapes, and also in Arnold Light we have similar options. So I'm gonna use the first Arnold Light right now, and I'm gonna place it using auto grid, so it's gonna like snap to, if I want to snap it to the floor, I can snap it to the floor. If I want to snap it to the vertical wall, I can snap it to the vertical wall, and so on. And you can see that it's looking like a rectangle light with a target. This is what we saw also previously. So we know that this can be directed toward our subject. And you can see that I'm kind of surrounding my character there using lights, creating what is called a 3-point lighting system. So I have like a main light coming from one direction, then I have another one, but we're gonna talk more about that later. Just gonna show you that I'm not just using a single light. If you want to have a nice 3D effect, you need to use different lights with different parameters. And again, we have here target. We can change the shape of the Arnold light. We have many different type. We have the spotlight again. We have the rectangle or quad. So you can see the name change, but the substance stayed the same. The values are pretty similar. So you can change the width, the height, the cone angle. There you go. You can change lens radius, penumbra, which is kind of the fall off field of the light. So just play around with the different types of lights. And let's run a quick interactive rendering here in the viewport to see what we've done so far. So we can of course do better, but this is just again the start to introduce the different types of lights to you, and now you can change how you can manage them a little bit with the parameters. Now this is a cylinder light, so just make sure that it's rotated. So some of these lights, they actually have size, they can be treated like objects, essentially like a real cylinder. And you can see I can create like a neon effect here, lamp, a cylindrical lamp, and I can change and give another color so to create something a little bit different. There you go. So you can really play around, and they have a really beautiful effect on the scene. And again, you can see I am changing the size, the dimensions of this rectangle light or quad light. So the shape is going to affect not only the lining on the subject, but also the shadows. So larger lights usually produce diffuse shadows. Smaller and more concentrated light, they produce sharpened shadows. And you can see everything here just by checking the interactive rendering. So by changing the parameters, you will see how they're gonna affect the lighting and the shadows in your scene. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here. Now a portal also, it's representing a natural light. So it can be placed just outside the window where you are in an interior. So it's a rectangle light. Now let's see also here in Arnold we have color and we have presets for colors, which again are due to the temperature. Just like in real life, they Always refer to temperature when we talk about colors in lights, or you can just apply a color that you want. So you either go by presets, you can use the Kelvin and the temperature, or the color. You can see they are really similar to what we saw in the photometric lights. So Kelvin degrees, this is more a white situation where you are in the middle. So the more you increase it, the more it's gonna get blue or bluish. Now we can also apply a texture, which means that I'm gonna like project an image, but I'm gonna see that later on. Of course, we can change the intensity, and if it's a pretty intense, that's gonna become our key light coming from one side, and usually it's balanced by another light on the other side, which is the fill light. And so we can adjust here the intensity, the exposure. Also, the size is gonna affect the intensity. So the bigger is the light, in this case the rectangle, the more intense will be its lighting power. The smaller will be, the less intense. So you need to increase the intensity if you decrease the size, and goes all the way also on the opposite. So if you wanna just go there and balance the size and the intensity, because when you have a really small light, you need a lot of intensity. When you have a really big light, you're gonna lower the intensity. And when you have a really small light, again, you're gonna have really sharp shadows. So small light, it's gonna be like more of a spotlight. Big lights are like umbrella lights or diffusers, or big panels emitting light or bouncing the light back from another light source. Also, we can increase the samples. Every time you see the samples, you are increasing quality. And of course, you want to make sure that you have cast shadows turned on. We can also use atmospheric shadows, and these are other parameters here, again, for the intensity. And this is like the overall power of the light. And in this contribution panel, you can see how the light is contributing to the different channels of your scene. So diffuse, specular, these are all let's say parameters that refer to materials. So if I drop down the specular, for example, here, the light will not be visible as a specular, so as a reflection on a reflective material. So you can say here how your light is gonna behave when it's gonna relate to materials. So if it's gonna be visible or in reflections or not, how much, and so on. So you can distinguish all those parts. And again, we're back here in the photometric light, and also here you have the possibility to turn on and off, work with the shadows, work with the size, and so on. So they look really similar. And again, this is just an introduction to global illumination, direct light, indirect lighting, and all the different types. Now you may want to turn off all the lights and work just one by one so that you can concentrate and experiment a little bit with all these different shapes and types of light that can represent a lot of different situations in reality. Photometric and Arnold Light are all really realistic, and they just work as they supposed to in reality. And this one here is the sky dome, which is similar to the environment. So it's not gonna be directional light, so you can place it again anywhere you want. Distant light is more like a sunlight. So if you use distant and sky dome, it's like you're using sun and sky. But we're gonna continue in the next video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next lesson.